Genovese. I run a website locally called door64.com. I also have a blog called brainshower.com. I've been developing in Drupal for about 2.5 years now, both setting up both of the websites I mentioned and doing some development on the side too. I'm looking to just see what, collectively see what everybody has to offer and try to learn as much as I can today and try to give some back. You can find me on Twitter at mgenovese, Mgenovese, and I'm on LinkedIn and Facebook. Pretty easy to find too, Matt Genovese. I'll give you, what I'll do is I'll give you a little background about my experience, and I'm really just going to kind of open it up and see what people are interested in learning. I heard a bit, I took some notes about what people were mentioning on the tape here, and we'll, I want, my goal is to help you as much as you can with whatever you need to learn about, and obviously matrixed with what I know about. So, I'll try to help you as much as I can, and we can try to make it a very useful experience for everybody. So my background, I'm a little bit strange in the area. My background is actually in chip design. I work in I worked in semiconductors for about 11 years in functional verification. So my background is actually not in traditional web design. But that said, I have a programming background also. I've done some consulting for startups in programming and user interface and things like that. So my background is kind of varied. I started door64, which you see on the screen here, actually in 2006, and it failed horribly, and that's a whole other discussion why it did. But the point is that I chose a CMS that was not Drupal, and that was part of the reason. And I'll say that because I chose this other one, and I'll make it nameless for now because I don't want this going out, and I don't want to be flaming other CMSs out there. But the one that I chose was it had a very spaghetti code base. It seemed to have everything I needed at the time, but when I got under the covers and started using it, I found that it was just very difficult to get things done, and if there were any fixes that had to be made, I just, the support wasn't there. There was even one time where I talked to the guy who started the CMS, and he had no idea, how to fix the problem. So I was in a pickle, and at that time I was making other mistakes with door64, and things just wasn't working out. So I killed it, or I let it die, and I ended up taking a number of months off to rethink my strategy for how I was going to, if I was going to even retry doing it again. And I started with Drupal to evaluate that. I said, well, I might as well. I'm going to get away from this other CMS. I'm going to try Drupal anyway, and see how it works. And it turned out that it was working so well that I thought, well, I'm going to build a demo site and see if I could rebuild what I think door64 version 2, the resurrection of it, would look like. And it started working so well that this is it. I just kind of took the test site and made it the production site, and it's been running that way ever since. So why did I choose Drupal? And I can't claim complete foresight. A lot of it's hindsight things that I realize now that I was kind of lucked out on by picking Drupal. But this is why I think it's an excellent platform. Part of it is that I think it has a very well thought out data model underneath the covers. Drupal, does anybody here know Java? Does anybody here have an understanding of Java, and Unix as well, perhaps? Okay. So people have there's an appreciation that you have. Let me go back to Unix. There's an appreciation you have for the permission structure and just the way that the Unix file system again has a fairly well thought out model. And in Java, there's a neat capability where everything is an object, right? So you can grab hold of something, and even if you don't know what it is, you can still grab hold of it. And so I use these two analogies to explain why Drupal is so useful, because Drupal, like Unix, has very delineated areas for permissions and for types of content, and of course the theme comes into there, and they're very they're segregated but yet they all work together. Much like in Unix, where you have your permissions and you have your files and the various aspects, groups. Okay, in Unix, I think carries over very nicely to Drupal. And so it's the paradigm. People say that Drupal has a learning curve, and I think it does, unless you come from a background where you have other technical experience in these in Unix and other places where, like, boy, everything seems to make sense. It was very well thought out in that way. As I was mentioning about in Java, everything's an object. Here, everything's a node. Almost everything's a node. And I think they're getting towards everything being a node. But that type of data model allows you to write modules, write plugins that can interact with other plugins who were made in isolation, right? And they don't have to know about each other, but yet they can work together. And that's the beauty of it. And you can, even if another module created another content type, you can still grab hold of it and do things with it because everything's an object, everything's a node. And I could go on about that, but I think the data model is solid. It was well thought out from the beginning, and that provides for a very extensible platform. The code base. Secondly, the code base is very solid. That old CMS that I was telling you about that will go nameless. You go in there and you find code commented out, and questions like should we change this in the core, and it's just like, oh my gosh, what am I getting into? and that was at the point where I started losing faith in that particular CMS. In Drupal, you find very solid code, and you find a very active community developing it. So I don't think there's too much more to say about that, except for that you're very much able to talk to people in the community and get answers to your questions if they haven't already been answered already. The third, there was one more thing I was going to say about that, but okay, well, I'll move on. The third thing I like about Drupal is that it has a plethora of add-on modules already, and most CMSs have add-on modules. But as I was saying before, you call them plugins or modules. It's the same nomenclature. But what I was saying before is that because of the data model that Drupal uses, and any module can plug in and really help, or add on to the functionality of any other module or any other part of the core. You have this extensive list of modules that are already out there really become very powerful because they can enhance almost anything else that anything provides, and you can start aggregating functionality together and create some really neat new functionality that nobody ever conceived of. For example, in another CMS, if you write an event calendar, okay, and if it's written in isolation, and if you have no idea how an event calendar object is handled, okay, by that plugin, then writing your module to add on to that event calendar functionality can be very difficult, and you have to go and look and see how did they implement an event calendar to be able, so that you can add on to the functionality. And now your module, what you've written, is probably pretty tied to their implementation. In Drupal, it's not that way. They write an event calendar and it adds on to the core data object of a node, okay, and it has a certain content type. But because it's a core functionality that they're adding on to, then you already understand how that core object is put together because they're using it that way. And so you can add on to that as well, and you can add on to their functionality. And you don't need to know anything about how they implement things, because you can grab hold of the object and query it and do some things to it and enhance it. And that's why I was saying that you can write modules in isolation that work together without ever having to know about each other.